Let me start by saying that the reason why I've decided to make this video is because I've read and replied to many comments in my other videos, sometimes leading to full-blown discussions with people who wholeheartedly believe Rey to be the granddaughter of Obi-Wan Kenobi, or at the very least love the idea of it. I myself find the argument to be truly compelling, but with that being said, what I'm going to try to do here is challenge some of the more well-established evidence, playing devil's advocate, if you will. So just be aware of that going in and before you start going off on me in the comments. I'm also going to try to bring up at least one curious piece of evidence that, as far as I know, no one else has touched on. And now with that little disclaimer out of the way, let's jump right into this. Now first, I have to bring up Rey's English accent in The Force Awakens. A lot of people cite this as evidence since Obi-Wan also had an English accent in the movies. The biggest problem with this is that accents aren't inherited. They're simply determined by where you grew up and how those around you speak. So if Rey grew up mostly on Jakku, why then does she have an English accent, which in Star Wars lore is associated with having grown up in the core worlds? Well, what if there isn't a Star Wars answer for this, but a real world one? What if Daisy Ridley just couldn't pull off an American accent well enough? Remember that J.J. Abrams at one point said that Daisy's acting was a bit wooden when they first started filming Episode 7. What if that's because they were trying to get her to do an American accent, and it just wasn't working out and they had to abandon the idea? And yes, they probably realized Star Wars fans would question her accent, but for the sake of making a good movie, they didn't force her to do it. Now, I'm not familiar with anything else Daisy Ridley has been in, and I know she hasn't been in much, so I'd be curious to see if she's ever done an American accent anywhere else. Okay, with that out of the way, the big question has to be just who Rey's grandmother would be if Obi-Wan is the grandfather. Now, a lot of people will immediately point to Satine from the Clone Wars animated series. Who's that, you may be wondering? Well, to go over it very briefly, Satine was the Duchess of Mandalore during the Clone Wars and the years leading up to it. And when she came into power, she sided with the new Mandalore ideals, which were all about peace instead of Mandalore's traditional warrior-like culture. This, of course, angered some people, and the Jedi Council were forced to intervene to protect her. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan were assigned to her, and the three more or less went on the run from bounty hunters for roughly a year. During this time, Obi-Wan and Satine started to develop feelings for each other, and it was revealed in the appropriately named episode of the Clone Wars, Voyage of Temptation, that Obi-Wan had loved her and would have left the Jedi Order for her had she only asked. Now, here's the main problem with Satine being Rey's grandmother. If at some point the Duchess of Mandalore, essentially the ruler of an entire planet, would have become pregnant and had a child, it would have been huge news and Obi-Wan would have no doubt heard about it, somehow or from someone. I'm sure the Jedi Council would have also gotten word that Satine had a child, coincidentally enough, shortly after the year she spent with Obi-Wan, and no doubt they would have had some words with him. However, you can make the argument that Satine's pregnancy was somehow covered up, especially if Obi-Wan was the father, to spare her the embarrassment and to protect Obi-Wan from possible repercussions. Still, I'm not sure just how easy it would be to cover up for a woman in her position. This would also mirror Anakin's story a bit too much in my opinion. As for Sabine from Rebels being their child, as some suggest, the similar names are compelling, but for all we know, they're just both common names on Mandalore. Not to mention countless people in the real world have the exact same first and last names, but are of absolutely no relation to each other. Then there's the fact that Sabine looks absolutely nothing like either Obi-Wan or Satine. Also, in a recent trailer for the second half of Season 3 of Rebels, we get a glimpse of Sabine's mother who does actually look like her. Also in the Rebels episode, Trials of the Darksaber, Sabine talks about her family and her mother, and she's very much still alive and hence can't be Satine, who was killed by Darth Maul during the Clone Wars. Okay, so if Satine isn't the grandmother of Rey, maybe Obi-Wan fell in love with someone else during his time on Tatooine. Or maybe he left the planet for a short period of time during those 19 years and had a encounter with some woman. And that woman would turn out to be Rey's grandmother. This possibility, I believe, is far more likely than the Satine theory, and there may even be some evidence to back it up. Now, let's go to A New Hope, more specifically, shortly after Obi-Wan rescues Luke from the Tusken Raiders and takes him back to his humble little abode. While there, Obi-Wan presents Luke his father's lightsaber and goes on to tell him about their friendship. He then goes on to tell him about the Force and the Jedi and says this curious line about his past. I was once a Jedi Knight like your father. Why exactly does Obi-Wan say that he was once a Jedi Knight? Does that mean he doesn't consider himself one anymore? Perhaps he's come to the realization, after years of reflecting in seclusion, why the Jedi were defeated by the Sith, and that's because their ideals were flawed. If that's the case, he would no longer be beholden to their code and may have done things otherwise forbidden, like having a lover at some point. What if, and this is just pure speculation, it all just got to him at one point. Here was a man who had given up everything and devoted his whole life to a flawed ideal, the Jedi ideal, and was now about to continue to follow their path even after their downfall and defeat, and continue to give up everything for them. So what if, just for a short time, he said the hell with it and wanted a real life and left Tatooine, booking passage aboard a ship he found at Mos Eisley Spaceport, a place he told Luke was a wretched hive of scum and villainy, maybe because he'd had a bad experience there once. So maybe while away from Tatooine, he meets somebody and falls in love and starts a different life, but it's only a matter of time before his responsibilities start to gnaw away at him. He may not wholly believe in the Jedi ideal anymore, but he certainly still want to see the Emperor and Darth Vader, a monster that he likely feels he helped create by failing Anakin in his training, stopped. Like it or not, he has to go back to Tatooine and watch after Luke in the hopes that this boy can grow up and one day undo the great wrong that he was a part of. So he leaves behind this woman that he loves, her never knowing he was once a Jedi by the name of Obi-Wan, but rather only knowing him as a man named Ben, and he, of course, doesn't know that she was with child when he left. Or maybe what sends him back to Tatooine is hearing rumors about the Empire's new enforcer, a seemingly mechanical man wearing an all-black suit and wielding a lightsaber like the Jedi used to use, only a crimson red one. Maybe he looks into the matter and hears the name Darth Vader, which he knows to be Anakin's Sith name thanks to the recording he saw during Episode 3. This may be how he discovers that Anakin/Vader didn't die on Mustafar, as he likely believes, and knowing this sends him back to Tatooine to keep watch after Luke and to recommit to his training to become a Force ghost, just in case he is needed after death to stop the Sith in some way. Also keep in mind that for one to succeed in becoming a Force ghost after death, they must overcome all fear and give up all attachments. So he had to abandon and forget this woman he'd grown to love in order to do just that. Now, does that all sound like a crazy story? Maybe, maybe not, but if there's any chance that Obi-Wan is the grandfather of Rey, such a scenario would likely be one of the few options you could go with that would make any sense, unless you want to go with him having a one-night stand, which I highly doubt they'd use. And the real problem is I'm taking one line spoken by Obi-Wan in A New Hope and a few other interesting tidbits to build an entire story around. It goes beyond simple speculation and straight into fan fiction. Then again, if Lucasfilm really is going to go with the Kenobi idea, they pretty much are going to have to do exactly what I just did. And that line about being once a Jedi does leave them open a lot of doors. And moving on now, a lot of people cite Rey using a Jedi mind trick on the stormtroopers in Starkiller Base as evidence that she's a Kenobi because apparently Obi-Wan's specialty were mind tricks. But were they really? Sure, we see him use the Jedi mind trick very successfully to get himself, Luke, and the droids past a squad of stormtroopers at Mos Eisley, but I'd argue that was something any Jedi could have pulled off. As evidence of that, when Luke comments about he was amazed that they got past these troops, Obi-Wan tells him that the Force can have a strong influence on the weak-minded, which is pretty much admitting what he'd done wasn't all that impressive for a Jedi. He just tricked some weak-minded stormtroopers after all. Then in the prequels, we see Obi-Wan again use the mind trick on a drug dealer who's trying to sell death sticks to a Jedi in a club. I'm going to go ahead and assume this guy was pretty weak-minded too. So if this is his specialty, we've yet to see him use it in a truly impressive fashion, or on someone that is strong-minded. Let's also not forget that we've seen plenty of other Jedi successfully use mind tricks. Even Ezra from Rebels has successfully used it on Imperials. Qui-Gon had no problem using it on Boss Nass in The Phantom Menace, before failing on Watto because Toydarians are immune to mind tricks. Luke used it on Bib Fortuna to get himself an audience with Jabba, and sure, when he tried to use it again on Jabba himself, it failed, but that's because, again, Hutts are immune to mind tricks. And speaking of Luke using a mind trick, when did he even learn how to do them? Do you honestly think it was part of Yoda's crash course training on Dagobah? Or did you just see Obi-Wan do it that one time on Tatooine and then pretty much self-taught it to himself at some point? If that's the case, it reiterates the fact that pretty much any Jedi can use them successfully. Most likely Rey using the mind trick, as improbable as it may seem barring a good explanation to come, was yet another throwback to the original movies for the non-hardcore fans to get a kick out of. I really don't think it was meant to connect her to Obi-Wan. Now, moving on to Rey's Force vision and hearing Obi-Wan's voice during it, telling her, "These are your first steps." Is this concrete evidence that Rey is a Kenobi because they'd need a family bond to commune this way? Well, let's keep in mind that there are only 4 Force ghosts even known to exist. Those being Qui-Gon Jinn, Yoda, Obi-Wan, and Anakin Skywalker. And to really add some gravitas to this scene, it makes sense that one of them would reach out to her and try to let her know that her life, her real journey, is just beginning. Now, you could argue they should have used Yoda for this, but we do hear his voice in there, though it's just a quote taken from Empire Strikes Back, and not him talking directly to her as Obi-Wan does. But does Obi-Wan talking to her, and remember he's just one of 4 Force ghosts, really imply a link? Well, using Qui-Gon wouldn't have fit because he is the less known among the 4 to casual fans. And I think they didn't use Anakin because there's a chance something is going on with him and his Force ghost. And even if there isn't, they would save his first appearance since the Return of the Jedi to talk to his son Luke. So that leaves Yoda and Obi-Wan to choose from to say something directly to her. And of the two, Yoda would again be the bigger reveal, when they would probably leave for episode 8 or 9 when we see his full Force ghost. Now let's also keep in mind that Obi-Wan spoke to and appeared to Luke on several occasions throughout the original trilogy, and there's obviously no family connection there. But how did Obi-Wan even know about Rey to speak to her, some wonder? Well, as a Force ghost, which makes him a part of the cosmic Force, I'm assuming Obi-Wan is privileged to all sorts of knowledge that no living being has ever known or discovered. We also know that, thanks to Season 6 of the Clone Wars, that Force ghosts exist in a place where there is no future or past. In other words, it's a totally non-linear existence, which implies they know past, present, and future. So it's no surprise that he would know about Rey and her destiny and would want to help steer her down the right path, the path of the light. Also keep in mind that in Rebels, Yoda, who is still alive at this point, knew about and appeared to Ezra, and there's clearly no family connection there. It also shows that, through the Force, many things are possible and able to be seen. Yoda even says in The Empire Strikes Back about Luke that he's been watching him for a long time, and clearly he hadn't been doing that directly, but rather through the Force. And what if Yoda and Obi-Wan communed somehow through the Force about Luke during their exiles on Tatooine and Dagobah respectively, which is no stretch if a mostly untrained Ezra could speak with Yoda. It'd be more proof that the family connection isn't needed, nor is much training to communicate through the Force. So it's not impossible that Obi-Wan, with no relation to Rey whatsoever, had been watching her and waiting for just the right moment to speak with her, maybe even being the one responsible for the Force vision she had so she could begin to understand how important she was, and that she was taking her first steps into a larger world, which is what Obi-Wan told Luke once upon a time. Now, something else to keep in mind is that the woman Obi-Wan did once love, Satine, was killed right in front of him, and that was then because of a vendetta Darth Maul had against him. Just how eager is Obi-Wan going to be to fall in love again, or to have a child? Not to mention, and by no means do you have to agree with this, but if Obi-Wan does leave Tatooine, or fall in love on the planet, or even have a one-night stand, it will completely change the character many of us thought him to be. I like the idea that, even though he may have seen the flaws of the Jedi and why they failed, and that's why he says he was once a Jedi, that he stayed on Tatooine and with grim determination did his duty to watch and protect Luke. That he trained to be a Force ghost, overcoming all fear and giving up all attachments in case he would be needed after death, which he was. Because had Obi-Wan failed to become a Force ghost, he's never able to manifest to Luke on Hoth and direct him to Yoda on Dagobah, which means Luke likely never receives the crucial little training that he does, and then never redeems his father and defeats the Emperor. Another thing to keep in mind is that George Lucas once described Obi-Wan as an average Jedi, not a particularly powerful one. Keep in mind that Obi-Wan even admits to Anakin that he will likely become a far greater Jedi than he could ever hope to be. So if Obi-Wan is just an average Jedi, nowhere near on the same level as a Skywalker, why is his granddaughter so powerful? So powerful, in fact, that she defeated Kylo Ren, who is a Skywalker and who's trained under both Luke and Snoke, while Rey either has no training at all or very little that was learned at a very young age and had been forgotten for some 10 years before suddenly recalling it. If you try to say Obi-Wan's Force ghost helped her in this fight, I point out what Obi-Wan himself told Luke in The Empire Strikes Back when Luke was about to run off to Bespin where he was likely going to encounter Vader. If you choose to face Vader, you will do it alone. I cannot interfere. So if he couldn't interfere then, I highly doubt he could now. In closing, I don't hate the idea of Obi-Wan being Rey's granddaughter. It's honestly a pretty damn good one, and I wouldn't be upset if it does come to pass. However, and again, you don't have to agree with me, I want there to be more to Rey's story than just having special parents to be the explanation for her power. This awesome new character deserves that. She deserves to be something unique and new. So if she is a Kenobi, then I hope there is a further twist that explains why she's so powerful. Again, just my thoughts on the matter. Well, that's all I got for you this time. Let me know in the comments below what you think, and let's talk some Star Wars. Is Rey the granddaughter of Obi-Wan, or is there another explanation for some of the evidence that points in this direction? Also, please subscribe to my channel and check out some of my other videos. If you're already a subscriber, then thanks for your continued support. And as always, thanks for watching.